Thank you, Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Casey, and committee members for the opportunity to talk about the current state of consumer fraud that targets older persons. My name is Doug Shadel, and I'm the director of AARP Washington. I've spent a couple decades now, both as a fraud investigator and educator, and more recently as a researcher trying to understand this crime. Today, imposter scams are on the rise, as we've already heard from you, Chairman Collins. Federal Trade Commission reports that imposter fraud complaints have risen from about 120,000 in 2013 to over 380,000 in 2017 in the latest Consumer Sentinel report. We did a study at AARP Washington identifying the following top scams, and some of this is repetitive from what you were saying, Senator Collins, but let me just describe a couple of these. The tech support scam is the #1 scam that we see going on that targets our folks. It's a computer pop-up alert prompts a call to a toll-free number to eliminate a virus, and the scammer charges a fee to remove a non-existent problem. Phishing scams are a close second behind it. Phishing, P-H-I-S-H-I-N-G. You receive a notice that looks like it's from your bank or credit card company urging you to contact them with personal information to fix a problem with your account with the goal of stealing your identity. Close behind that, lottery scams. Someone contacts you to announce you won a lottery and all you need to claim the prize is to pay a fee. The IRS scam, we've heard about that from you, Senator Collins. Someone alleging to be from the IRS calls and scares you into paying thousands of dollars or you'll be thrown in jail. Romance scams, someone contacts you on a dating website and starts love bombing you. We can talk about what that means, but it's essentially showering you with praise right out of the gate, even though you don't really know them that well, in an attempt to later borrow money from them. And the grandparent scam, which we just heard about, this is where, well, I don't need to repeat it, a distressed relative calls, and there's a variety of ways that they do that. Well, what do all these scams have in common? One thing is the scammer pretends to be someone they are not. And in an age of advanced technology, it has never been easier to do that. One con artist said, if you're a scammer and you're not using the internet, you're guilty of malpractice. The second thing they have in common is that they try to arouse your emotions through fear or excitement in order to get you to make a decision you may later regret. And over the past decade, AARP has interviewed numerous con artists. And when we ask them what their central strategy is for scamming people, they always say the same thing. Get the victim under the ether. Well, what is ether? Ether is a slang for a heightened emotional state that forces the victim to react emotionally rather than think logically. In 2014, we explored this idea with our partners, AARP, the FINRA Foundation, and the Stanford University Center on Longevity. We wanted to test the role of emotions in making people vulnerable to fraud. And we researched whether making a buying decision while in a heightened emotional state makes it more or less likely to fall for a scam. All the con artists said this is true, and many victims have said this is true, but what does social science say? Can we prove that it's true? The findings supported this contention, that the goal is to get them under the ether, and that in fact does make especially older people vulnerable. How did we prove this? Well, in one experiment, subjects played a rigged game in which they initially won money, but then lost continually, leaving them in an angry state. In another experiment, subjects played a game in which they initially lost money and then continually won, resulting in a positive emotional state. And a third group played a game that created no mood change. Then all three groups were asked to review and rate deceptive advertisements based on their credibility and how likely they would be to purchase. The results were telling. Older people who were in a heightened emotional state, either positive or negative, were more likely than the control group to say they would buy, whether or not they found the ads to be credible. They were also easier to arouse and get into that emotional state than younger persons. Well, how does this research apply to prevention? For decades now, fraud prevention has focused on this phrase, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And I've even said that for years. The problem is that only works if you're thinking logically when you're evaluating the scam. And the con man's main goal is to get you out of logic and into emotion. So a lot of our workshops teach this. We teach the persuasion tactics that are done in the service of getting people into a heightened emotional state. When you think of the lottery, you think of a heightened positive emotional state. I've just won $10 million. With the grandparents, it's fear. These are all emotions that are making people vulnerable. We have dozens of volunteers all over the state, not all of them as productive as Mary here, but many, many volunteers using this research. We have a peer counseling, we have a call center that calls, an outbound call center that calls thousands of people every year and does peer counseling. And this peer counseling is another thing maybe we can talk about later that has been really effective. I just want to make one final point. Last November, AARP announced a national partnership with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service to warn military veterans about fraud. 8 in 10 military victims have received at least one scam attack in the last year, and the number of veterans who report being victimized by fraud is significantly higher than for the general public. So beginning this week, there will be this brochure, and I've provided these to the committee. It's called They Protected Us, Now It's Our Turn. And it really just describes some of the things we've been talking about here today, the common tactics and scams that target seniors, and also allows them to report. And maybe we can talk later about the value of reporting, because I think that's both good for law enforcement to hear from us, but it also has a self-inoculating effect. If you're reporting, if you're looking at these solicitations, not because you're interested, but because you want to report them, that actually protects you from being scammed. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Shadel, I know you've done a lot of research in this area, and we know that veterans are disproportionately affected, as you mentioned in your statistics. Do you have research that shows that particular kinds of scams are directed at particular population groups? Are there certain demographics that link up to specific scams?
You mean for veterans or just in general?
In general.
In general, yes. Thank you for that question. We've done a lot of profiling research over the years. You know, we used to, in the fraud prevention world, figuratively fly over a football stadium and drop 60,000 brochures out onto that stadium, hoping that by reaching everyone, we would also reach the smaller subset that are victimized. That's not a very efficient way to do fraud prevention, which gave rise to this whole body of research about profiling. So we, for example, surveyed known victims of lottery fraud and the general public to see how they differ from the general public. Same with investments, same with veterans now. So we've got some pretty well-developed profiles, and a lot of times they're very different. For example, take investment victims and lottery victims. At first, we lumped them together and compared them to the general public, and there was no difference. But when you separate, that's because when you separate them out, they're precisely divergent. The lottery victim tends to be female, tends to be over the age of 70, lower educational attainment, lower income. Investment fraud victims are more likely to be men, 55 to 62, higher education, and you're going to reach those people in completely different ways with completely different messages. Likewise with veterans, this brochure is informed by profiling research we did with veterans with U.S. Postal Inspection Service. So we're getting a little smarter about it. You can customize the message that way, and you could target it, and hopefully it's more efficient.
Thank you. Senator Casey.
Thanks very much. Excuse me, I'll start.